The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the August installment of the Clinical Conduct
Muted.
series. My name is Lisa Martone, and I will be your moderator for the webinar today. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I want to share. First, we will be providing a copy of the presentation via email within 24 hours of the webinar ending. Please be sure to check the email you used to register for the emailed webinar. Also, we will be doing a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So please submit any questions you have at any time using the GoToWebinar questions box on the right side of your screen. Today's presentation is titled More eRegulatory Experiences, Embracing a Paperless Process for Your Site, and will be presented by Rick Arlow and his team from Complion. Rick was previously involved with clinical research through an NIH-funded MD, PhD medical scientist training program, which resulted in several publications in leading journals, including Neuroscience. Inspired by experience, Rick founded Complion to empower research sites while fostering regulatory compliance and human subjects protection with greater efficiency. Rick and his team have closely listened to the needs of their clients in order to evolve the industry-leading regulatory workflow and document management software designed for research bodies and related institutions. Rick has been involved with many biotech businesses, resulting in several patents as well as recognition in Business Week's Top 25 Under 25 Entrepreneurs. He also takes great pride and responsibility in Complion's contribution to enhancing the ability of research sites to provide new treatments and expand medical knowledge. And with that, I'll hand it over to Rick.
Hi everyone, this is Rick Arlow with Complion. Really happy to be on the call today and able to provide some experiences here from our side as well as from two leading sites to hear about their experiences as well. Happy to be here.
This is Lisa Boza-Archer. I'll be your facilitator engaging the sites today, and the purpose of this webinar today is to follow up on a previous webinar that we had provided entitled eRegulatory Experiences, a Site Without Binders. And during that time we had visited a site that had gone through the transition process of a paper eRegulatory and what that picture looked like for her and her team as they were embracing a more electronic process. We got a lot of great feedback and interest, so we decided to delve a little deeper into this and just get other perspectives from similar sites that have also gone the same way as that particular site. So we'd like to provide you this firsthand knowledge of two sites at hand, and we'll be doing this in a question-answer format, engaging each site. So before we go into the questions, I just wanted to introduce our speakers today. And so we have Dustin Caldwell from Optimed. He's the Director of Operations there. And I'll let Dustin just kind of give a high-level idea of his site and maybe a little bit about his experience in research just in general.
Hi, Lisa, thanks. My name is Dustin Caldwell, and I've worked with Optimed Research for about 4.5 years now. We were founded in 1999, primarily doing allergy and immunology. Since then, we've branched into sort of multiple disciplines and disease states. We are just now starting to move into a multi-site format, which we'll probably address later, and how moving to an eRegulatory system has sort of allowed us to do that as well.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite Neil Surasky to introduce himself and his site as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Neil Surasky. I am the Data Manager and Quality Assurance Coordinator for the Chesapeake Research Group. We are a clinical research site. We've been in operation since about 2004. I've been with the company since just after it started. We do primarily analgesic trials, post-bunionectomy. We've recently broadened our horizons into post-abdominoplasty studies, and we do a number of different things. We have a couple of different sites, and our site manager is actually not at our primary site, which again, as Dustin mentioned, well, I think we'll be addressing a little bit later, but I'm really glad to be part of this panel.
Thank you both. So now we'll just continue to the question aspect. So our first question is, typically, while people are considering becoming paperless and managing their documents electronically, they do so because their current manual process is problematic for them. So if you can each kind of speak to that and let our audience know what specific problems that your team could have identified with that might have led you to consider Complion's or solution or just going eRegulatory. So we could start with Dustin.
Sure. So I think that probably there was a couple things that sort of led us to this, and one of them I think is one that probably most sites can relate to. A lot of aspects of clinical research are sort of, I'm not going to say antiquated, but they're very paper-based. There's a lot of redundancies, and regulatory is no exception to that. I think for us, one of the biggest things that we were interested in was trying to sort of update the way that we operated as a whole across all aspects, and for us to be able to move towards a paperless system in regulatory was a big draw for us. We had an entire room, a regulatory room, that is just nothing but binders. If we have anywhere from 25 to 30 trials ongoing at a time, and some of those, of course, have cardiac outcome studies, so they're going on for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. You can imagine with correspondence and everything how cumbersome that all gets. On top of that, with moving those around with monitor visits, and then correspondence is one of the biggest ones. They just end up taking up so much room. And I think just trying to move towards a more streamlined process was something that really appealed to us, and that was one of the biggest early draws for us on this particular platform.
Thank you, Dustin. And how about Neil?
So the primary person who was doing all of our regulatory control was our site manager, and she was planning a move. And we really needed to find a way for all of us to be able to integrate together. And electronically, everything seems to be moving electronic anyway. This seemed to be an answer to that particular challenge. Again, as Dustin had mentioned, just the accumulation of tons and tons of papers, big binders that we have to store essentially indefinitely. It was really creating a lot of trouble, and we saw the electronic storage, we saw the electronic handling of documents being a great solution to what we were experiencing.
Thank you. My second question, there's some common concerns or barriers that people might have while exploring eRegulatory might be, will my CRA or sponsor accept this? Will the FDA allow this? What will my staff members think about this change? And then, of course, cost. So I was just interested to hear how your site overcame these barriers or other barriers, perhaps.
I can go ahead and start with this one. I already asked Lisa at one point if it was okay if I mentioned this, and she's like, yep, absolutely, go ahead. The first time that she contacted our site about this, I said no because I was afraid that the CRAs and the sponsors wouldn't accept this. I didn't understand how this could be allowed. Luckily, she was persistent, came back later, and was able to sort of walk me through how this system worked, how it was part of living compliance, and how this could be utilized by by sites as a whole. Also at the same time, I'd actually been introduced to another group that was doing work primarily for sponsors and CROs, and they were trying to get CROs to adopt an eReg system that they would force the sites to use. So I saw that it was happening in places in the industry. I just hadn't seen it happening this way. And so when I spoke to Lisa a second time about this, and she was able to kind of explain and go through how this is all compliant and how it all works, we were thrilled, because this was something that we wanted to do, but we didn't think it was possible, because we didn't think that the industry had caught up to the point where they would be able to do this. Down there at the bottom as well, when we mentioned cost, costless has been a negligible factor for us. We've been able to pass through the cost to the sponsors in our contracts in every case. So there was no additional cost to our site to adopt this system. So everything really fell into place really nicely once we realized that this was something that the industry would allow us to do.
For us, I don't think it was as much a question as whether our CRA or sponsor would accept this. I guess we sort of just thought as we were going to do this, they would accept it because we were doing it. As we just entered into further discussions with Complion and with Lisa and Christina, who were exceptionally helpful, we realized very, very early on that everything they were doing was 21 CFR 11 compliant, and that we really had nothing to worry about in terms of regulatory compliance. Our biggest challenge, I think, was about our other staff members. We have a couple of different PIs, and I would say one of them is more tech savvy than the other. And so we were sort of concerned about about how that would work, and about integrating new technology into their everyday activities. It turned out that some of our concerns were correct, and some, early on we had to handhold one of our PIs through it. But now it's really funny. When we try to do anything differently, they're like, well, we want to do it this way. We know this way. We like this way. The eRegulatory platform has gotten so convenient, so easy to do, and yet still so compliant that they don't want to go back to anything else. Even wet signatures, they're like, well, can't I just do this electronically? And so the challenges that we thought we might have really never panned out. The one instance that I'll talk about a little bit later is where, even though we didn't anticipate our sponsor not accepting our system, one sponsor did reject it, and I'll tell you a little bit later how that happened. Suffice it to say that now they're on board as well.
Thank you. My next question, in your opinion, do you think sites have a good understanding of 21 CFR Part 11? And if not, what might some misconceptions or misunderstandings be?
Okay, so I'll start this one. I think that sites in general has to be sort of narrowed down a little bit. I think from a regulatory perspective, those who are dealing with this on a routine basis really do have a good idea of what 21 CFR 11 is regarding electronic signatures and traceability of electronic documents, etc. I don't think that as a whole, the people who are not handling electronic documents, regulatory or otherwise, really have that good a grasp. I'm not sure that they need it, apart from what they are asked to do. But I think that the system really helps to alleviate all that. Everything it does is 21 CFR 11 compliant. And so even for somebody who doesn't have a great understanding of 21 CFR 11, the system is designed so that regardless of their understanding, they're being compliant anyway. It has to be that way.
Thank you. Dustin?
Yeah, I can actually echo what Neil said and specifically say, yes, it's I would say less so site-specific and more so responsibility-specific within a site. In our case, our operations are very compartmentalized. We have one person that is just our regulatory and compliance officer. We have another person that does, just operations and things like that. When I had first was approached by Lisa and was looking at this, I didn't handle regulatory. So I had this vague notion of I think how compliance worked as far as what the industry would and would not accept. So that was, I think that was sort of the stumbling block for us. But as Neil said, once you sort of go through the training and you're exposed to the software and the system and the way it works, it all becomes very intuitive. And it's just sort of something that you just sort of accept at face value now. I say, oh yes, I understand. It's all Part 11 compliant. I understand how this works, and everything fits the way it's supposed to, just sort of as Neil mentioned.
And this is Rick here. The one thing I want to mention that I've seen a lot personally is there definitely are multiple components for compliance. Some of those are the software and how it's set up. Some of it is related to the processes that are being handled at the site level. And another major component is an ongoing validation requirement. And what that means, to talk briefly about the last point, is really in regards to having a process in place that on every new release of the software and prior to going live in the software, the site can go through and essentially trace what are the requirements that the FDA has into individual test cases and test every aspect of the software. So this can be a daunting process for certain types of software, and if the site has to do those responsibilities on their own. But there are opportunities to really streamline this process significantly and automate those types of tasks so that a site's being compliant, but in a very efficient manner. So I just wanted to bring up a little bit about that to really make sure that everyone had an idea of what are those required components.
That brings us to our next question. Actually, they might not understand, as Rick was saying, but it's not just upon the implementation of the software, but after particular system updates. So for Dustin and Neil, as a site, what is your understanding of what the system validation means, and how do you go about this? Or maybe you can speak on your experience that as there have been updates to the compliance system, what does that really look like to a site?
So I've always been a big proponent of the idea that no one person knows everything about everything, and we're supposed to be able to surround ourselves with the people and the systems that know the things that we don't. That being said, having been working in compliance Acuvia for a while, I know what it does, I know what it can do, and I know how it does it for the most part, but people around me generally don't. So they might ask me the question, well, Neil, you say that the system does this. How do you know it does this? Well, that I think is what the validation is. The validation is a way for us to be able to show whomever, whether it's somebody within our company, somebody who is monitoring for a CRO or even sponsor, that our claims to Part 11 compliance. Our claims to the system being able to do this or to do that are valid. It can actually do what we say it's going to do. And so the validation, will go through each item, and it will illustrate for us that the system does what it claims to do. It's all documented, verifiable, and you can go back and recreate it, which is exactly what validation is supposed to do. And prior to actually being part of this system, I had no idea what went into it. It's extensive, and it's really, actually for my part, good to see that as we go through and we evaluate each element of the system and document that it's accurate and true to what it claims to be able to do, that we have an incredible system at our fingertips.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, reiterating what Neil said there. You pretty much covered all of it. I'll just touch lightly back on the thing. There's kind of two parts to it. One is, of course, as he mentioned, that this doesn't have to be this is not a, oh, take our word for it, it's all good, kind of a system. This allows you to empirically demonstrate that the system does what it says it's going to do, that it is compliant, and that you have documentation demonstrating that. If your monitors or anyone like that has any questions, it's sort of, well, here's the proof. At the same time, going through some of these system checks and updates and validations, it gives the people that are working with the system at the site level an opportunity to really learn it. That's that's sort of, I mentioned, I think, training earlier, and training is not really the right word, but I suppose that's how I think of it. When you go back through and you do these system updates, you get sort of a new look at the system each time, and you get these walkthroughs that explain how you're doing things and why you're doing things. So not only does it give an opportunity for you to demonstrate to the sponsor, or the CRO, or the monitor that the system is compliant, but it helps you to understand why it's compliant, and sort of gives you a peace of mind and understanding that what you're doing is on the up and up.
Thank you. Since this is a web-based tool, many sites such as Optimed and Chesapeake Research Group have identified this as an ideal tool for multi-site or remote teams. Can you tell us more about how leveraging a web-based tool has helped you with this?
I can jump on this one real quick. This was actually the real draw to us. And that's because of the way that we were based. As I mentioned before, we have a very compartmentalized operation with very specific departments that handle these things. That being said, what that gave us was the opportunity to leverage some of our resources at our primary site location and centralize some of those practices, such as recruitment and eRegulatory and things like that, to other site locations without having to increase our payroll costs or put more strain on someone like a coordinator. So our coordinators don't do any regulatory at our additional sites. They're hired, they coordinate, and that's all they have to worry about is doing the study itself. And meanwhile, all the regulatory is taken care of back at our central location, along with recruitment and all of that. So what this allowed us to do was really leverage what we already had in place and grow and keep continuity in our operations. This was a really big draw for us because this the way our site is sort of set up is we have, of course, our large primary location, and then we have our additional smaller sites that we can keep, again, our operations small and manageable, and then have everything centralized, that main one. It's also allowed us to come in, and when we identify other sites, physicians that are maybe struggling, having a hard time kind of getting their operations streamlined, it's allowed us to kind of come in and help them by centralizing a lot of the practices that they have that they may be struggling with back to our primary site, and then focusing on on operations directly on the ground at the site level. So this for us was absolutely critical in becoming a more streamlined multi-site operation. And in a lot of ways, it allowed us to not necessarily change, but to continue to work the way that we wanted to work without having to adopt new practices. In effect, it sort of it provided a sort of gestalt that kept everything together without having to reinvent the wheel at every additional site.
And for us, it was a similar thing, though that we don't have, I think, as many remote sites. We just have remote people doing things for us. Our site manager, as I said, is off-site. One of our PIs is actually off-site, and I can't tell you the number of times where prior to transferring to the eReg system, where certain signatures would have to wait. This doctor was out of town. This doctor was on vacation. This person was not. So with the system, we can just across the board invite all these people to be part of this, and then it doesn't matter where they are. Again, because it is a web-based tool, everybody who has access into it can do everything at any time. So if I have a PI that's out or on vacation, and we have, for example, an SAE, an SAE report needs to be sent and signed, or signed and sent in that order, actually. I can just text him and say, hey, check the site. Even more impressive is Acuvia has the correspondence feature, which will allow you to upload a document that needs to be signed and send it directly to the person who needs to sign it. It has made waiting for signatures essentially obsolete, but that was initially why we were concerned. As long as they're able to access their phone and click a link, they can do what they need to do. You don't have to be a web programmer. In fact, I am far from it. I don't understand half the stuff that the behind-the-scenes guys at Complion do. I have a problem, they respond to it, and I don't have to worry about it. But it means that everybody else on our site, in fact, across our sites, can do the same, and they don't have to worry about it. It adds confidence to our ability to do what we've said we can do as a site. And I think that confidence translates to CROs and sponsors that we can do what we say we can do.
Just to jump back in one more time, real quick there, I have to reiterate what Neil said about the e-signatures. I didn't mention that either, but that is a real game changer in a lot of ways. It really makes things so much easier when you don't have to, as he said, transport documents back and forth and try and catch the physician when he's in the office. And if they're away at a conference, that's fine. Like he said, they can bring it up on their phone and you can get signatures right there. And so that really helps with the turnaround time, which obviously makes the sponsors much happier when they're not sitting around waiting for signatures in that sense. Just wanted to jump in and say that he really hit that one right on the money. That's a big deal for us as well.
Thank you. The Complion platform is a vehicle that allows for secure storage of your regulatory documents, but it does not stop there. Now you can move beyond the storage and manage your trial documents from study startup through long-term archiving through the platform. And so this kind of piggybacks on the last comment, but moving beyond the storage capacity and explaining for the management of the actual process on the platform, maybe you can give us a picture of when your site adopted the platform and the process. Did you jump right in and utilize the whole thing, or was it more of a slower adoption? What did that look like for your site? Because all sites operate differently, so we just want to hear your experience.
So I'm the kind of guy who, once we start doing something, I want to jump in, all the way and get it, I want to access every feature. I want to use everything that we can possibly use. Didn't quite go that way initially. The e-signatures was a little bit slower, and in fact, we're still not using the site for delegation of authority. I'm in the process of still trying to convince some people that that's the way to go for that. But on the whole, we did move very quickly past just the storage idea for it. The correspondence is key, and that was sort of what I was just talking about, where if you have a document that needs to be signed, and signatures can actually take a number of different forms. For example, if you need to sign a 1572, you've got a signature, and you're approving the 1572, and you can tell them that. We have a practice where every follow-up letter from a monitor is reviewed and signed by the PI for that particular trial. This system will allow for an e-signature to mean just that they've reviewed the document. So it's really helped us a lot in being able to do that. And uploading those documents and sending them through correspondence was really, really helpful. However, I think probably one of my favorite features of the whole system is the add-on for Microsoft Outlook. That's the email system that our site uses. And with this add-on, every single email can just be sent from my Outlook directly into not just the system, but the very specific binder for that particular trial. I can remember times, where I would be, printing email after email after email, just reams of paper, and then sitting down and trying to make sure that they're in date and time order, and that I haven't missed anything, and comparing, one thread to the other to make sure that there isn't too much overlap, etc. That all goes away with this system. It's just uploaded immediately, and it's so easy. In fact, I just said to my site manager about a week ago that it's so easy to use. And if you have a study or a correspondence that applies to more than one study, for example, you've got a sponsor for which you are running 2 different studies at the same time, and one email refers to both of them. It's so easy to just send it to both binders rather than make copies of it and file it in 2 different regulatory binders. It's made things so easy. Space-wise, wow. We have like 4-inch binders for our correspondence for previous trials, and we've filled 2, sometimes 3 of them, where this just makes it all go so easy. Just this morning, I had asked about compiling my correspondence folder. One of the monitors for a study that had just closed asked for all of the correspondence for the trial so she could upload it to her sponsor's trial master file. And in about 5 minutes, rather than having 3, 4 binders worth of stuff, it was a little less than 150 megabytes, so it's a big file, but all the correspondence for the entire study from the time it began to the time it closed in a file that I could just put up on the FTP site and send to her, the entire thing. And it was amazing. We thought we might even have trouble with audits because of the electronic system, but we haven't, because it's all downloadable into a single file, and it was amazing. And I really appreciate the system for that.
Yeah, Neil, actually, you stole my talking points. That was pretty thorough, actually. I think he hit everything that I would say. I would reiterate again that I think when we first adopted this system, we actually, I think, mostly saw it as sort of the storage and aspect of it, and moved beyond that pretty quickly. I think once we realized how powerful the system was and what it could be used to do. Again, with correspondences, we ran into that same problem. I would say that, you know, in most of our binders, 75% of a binder tends to be correspondence by the time we're done with them. And as he mentioned before, again, making sure that, you know, a monitor, or even the FDA for that matter, we just went through an audit, you know, a couple of months ago, and correspondences was one of the biggest things that she looked at. And she said, I just want to see the narrative. I want to understand the narrative. And to be able to effectively transport that narrative and put it directly into the system without having to sort of compile all that and reconfigure a conversation, you know, after the fact, is extremely helpful.
Thank you. Adoption of a new process often means change management. How has utilization of Compliance platform changed the way your team works?
I think I mentioned earlier, I touched on this, I might have been a little vague with it. I said that in some ways this didn't change the way we worked. It allowed us to continue to work in the way that we already were without having to adopt new processes. And that's a little vague. What I mean by that is when we were moving to a multi-site operation, you know, originally the idea was that we sort of take the model that we had already created and the systems and operating procedures that we had already done, and then recreate those at each additional site. And of course, regardless of any kind of formula that you may have, when you try to repeat or duplicate a process elsewhere, you're always going to run into issues, especially when you don't have necessarily the ability to directly oversee or manage that, which is one of the things that can become troublesome with multi-site or even remote management. And instead of having to create a new, because we were looking in the early stages, we were looking, well, who would do this? We don't want to hire new regulatory people. You know, now are we going to train our coordinators to handle the regulatory as well? What aspects will they be responsible for? We were looking at having to have our main site and then create new methods of doing things at additional sites. What this allowed us to do is just say, no, everything will stay exactly the same. We're just going to have an additional site, and all of our processes related to regulatory will just be centralized. And so what this actually allowed us to do was grow without having to change at all. So that was again a big boon for us on this with this particular software.
So now it's my turn to thank Dustin for stealing my thunder. That's exactly what I was going to say. It really has allowed us to continue, even in the midst of staff moving around and you know, and all that. It has allowed us to continue working with a minimum of hiccups, if at all. We're continuing status quo just as it was. Our site manager continues to work with the regulatory, as do I. Nobody has to, you know, add anything else. We're just moving forward. I do want to say this, though. I think it's really interesting that despite the differences between Dustin's site and my site, the experiences with the system have really been similar. It does what it says it's going to do. It's made things easier for both of us, and I think it says something that we continue to reiterate what each other are saying. Just a thought.
Thank you. My 8th question is, can you share any challenges that you may have encountered along the way during your transition? So I'm going to go for Dustin first.
Yeah, to be completely honest with you, it wasn't all wine and roses at first, and the reason for that was really because of some of the people that we had at the site at the time. I think everyone knows, and I'm sure this is true in any industry, but it seems like there's a lot of people who have been doing this for a long time, and they've always done it this way, and this is how we're going to continue to do it. And we had a little bit of that at the beginning. We had some pushback, and it took a little bit of time to sort of get them to understand that this was a superior way of doing things, and that this is the future. Get on board. I think once we were able to move past that, and people got their hands on the system and began to use it and got familiar with it, those gripes quickly disappeared. I don't think that that's necessarily even unique to this software. We had the same problems when we moved to VoIP phones. We had the same problem when we moved to, new database management systems. We had the same problem when we moved. Anytime we make any kind of change in the company, there's always going to be voices of dissent. This one did not present anything that was more contentious than any of the others. I think that's just the kind of thing that you run into in almost any business when you have people who are established in their processes and their way of doing things. But now everything's cruising along nicely.
So I think in considering this question, there are really three challenges that we encountered. First one is the fact that when we started with the IQVIA system, we had trials that were underway at the time, and we had to decide whether we were going to include those particular trials in our new eReg system. One study was close enough to end that we decided, okay, we'll just keep that the way it is. Two other studies, I think it was, were in process. And so we made the decision to switch in the middle from a paper system to the eRegulatory system. I'm not sure that was perhaps the best way to go, because now what we ended up with was partial paper binders and then a partial regulatory binder. If I had to do it again, I don't know that I would have included those trials that were already underway in the transition, but you live and you learn. I think that was the first challenge. Second challenge that I definitely had alluded to earlier, we had not anticipated at all that we were going to get any kind of pushback from anybody, really, apart from internally. But we had a sponsor who had set up their trial to use electronic signatures, but it was their electronic signatures. They were using, it was DocuSign or something along those lines. And they would not accept our eRegulatory system, particularly for the sake of signatures. And we said, knowing the validity of Complion's IQVIA system, knowing the ease of the system, and again, for us, knowing what it could do, we said, well, we're not going to use your system. Perhaps it was a little cocky, but we stood up for what we knew was a good system. And we felt, well, the sponsor will bend to this and they'll let us do it. Turns out they didn't, actually. And they said, well, fine, if you're not going to use our system and we're not going to use your system, all the signatures for this trial will then be wet signatures. We'll just go to wet signatures. We did that for a little while, and then it was an interesting happenstance that we had a sponsor representative from that sponsor here at our site, along with the monitor for that particular trial, at the same time that I had a scheduled follow-up phone call with Lisa, as it happens. And so I was on the phone with Lisa, going through this system, and going through any issues we were having, and she asked if I was having any troubles. And I mentioned to her this issue with the sponsor, And it occurred to me that since the sponsor was here, I said, hey, why don't we bring the sponsor in and let you talk to the sponsor? So that's what we did. This sponsor rep came in along with the monitor who had already been active in our site and confidentially said she loved the way we did our things in the regulatory system. So the sponsor representative came into the office. We closed the door, and Lisa spoke with her. It wasn't long. It was maybe a 5 or a 10-minute conversation as Lisa explained the system. At the end of that conversation, the sponsor representative said to me, well, I'll take this back to our people and we'll see what we can do. I had no hope that there was going to be any change, and yet probably about 2 weeks later, the rep was actually back at our site, and she said, oh, by the way, I spoke to our people, and after talking with Lisa, we have no problems with your system. We'll go ahead and use your system for all the signatures. Just go ahead and continue working as you had been before. And so that was, it was a big win for us. We never expected to fight the battle. It was really comforting to know that we didn't have to fight that battle alone. Complion has all sorts of documents, all sorts of validation tools, and their staff is more than willing to talk with whomever we feel they should talk with in order to facilitate the transition to their system. And in this case, it absolutely worked. We've not had a single other sponsor have any issues with the system. I keep saying it's our system, like it's my system, but we've not had any other issues. We've been working with the e-signatures at QVIA, and they've had no problems with that, and that really worked out very, very well for us. There's a third challenge that I'm only sort of beginning to realize, and it's not a bad challenge to have. I am so used to hanging on to paperwork in binders, in folders, in charts. We've recently had a study closed. Everything's been done. And it was a study that we had used the QVIA system for. And I have probably an 1.5 inch high pile of paperwork, stuff that I had scanned into the system that it's all in there. But now my challenge is, can I bring myself to actually get rid of the paper? I'm still struggling with that. I don't know what I'm going to do with that yet, but it's not, as I said, a bad challenge to have. Part of me is saying I have to still hold on to everything. Part of me is saying, well, the study is done. Everything's in the system. Let's just shred this all. I'm sure I'll figure this out at some point, but I'm not there yet. It's just a challenge I got to face.
Thank you, both Neil and Dustin. And yes, to reiterate, you definitely can do away with your paper. And if you need some extra counseling, I'd be happy to talk to you after, Neil. But my last question is, most vendors in research tend to cater to sponsors, and is this the case with Complion? And this question was just kind of based on a conversation with Dustin, so I'm going to address it to Dustin specifically because we'd like to hear what he has to say.
Sure. So I'd mentioned earlier that the first time, years ago when Lisa contacted us initially about the eRegulatory system, I had said, that sounds great, that's amazing, we'd love to do it, but we don't think the industry is ready for it. We don't think that anybody else is going to be on board. Call us back in the future. And that was probably just a week or two, I think, before a DIA conference. And I was at a DIA conference, and suddenly there were booths for eRegulatory systems there. Every single one of them, though, was, and so first of all, that was sort of my first indication that, well, maybe this is possible. But the other thing was that every single one of them was geared towards the sponsors and the CROs. The way that these platforms were designed was they were trying to get the sponsors and the CROs to buy access to their program and assign it to a specific trial, and then basically give access portals to the individual sites, and then to sort of force them to use use their system. I think that for the most part what they were looking at again was trying to streamline the systems, but also to make it easier for the sponsors so that they could do off-site monitoring, they could monitor regulatory documents, and shorten the time that monitors are spending on site doing reviews and things like that. And I kind of approached one of them at one point just to kind of talk to them and say, well, what is this all about? So I started learning at that point actually from, I wouldn't even call them a competitor because they didn't work with sites, they worked with the sponsors, but finding out that this was something that could happen. And then, but once again, this was, yeah, we're not going to sell to you. We're kind of dealing with the sponsors, the CRO. You know, here's your pen, shoe. And I think when we got back to the site, I had another conversation with Lisa, and I said, okay, tell me a little bit more about this. And I think that one of the things that's so nice about the system here is that Complion is very site-centric. They spent a lot of time getting our feedback. We were sort of involved with, I think, when the software had just been launched, and so we gave them a lot of feedback, and they were very interested to know what processes we wanted to, what was important to us, what we wanted to see, and what we wanted the software to be able to do. And the amount of customer support I would say that they give is bordering on nauseating. They are absolutely on your side to the point that it's just, as Neil said earlier, you know, having them in your corner, that really is what it is. If you get pushback from a sponsor, if you have trouble with or questions or anything, they are absolutely on your side. And this is a system that was built and centered around sites. You know, there are other e-regulatory platforms out there, but nothing that really centers on what the sites want and need in the way that the IQVIA does. So that was our experience with it.
Thank you.
So
Go ahead,
can I add just something real quick?
Absolutely.
I think that one of the signs of power is versatility. And I mean, for example, our site also uses Clinical Conductor to do our patient databases and stuff. And it's a powerful tool and can be used in a number of different ways to do a number of different things. And I think that the Complion IQVIA system is similar in that it is, I agree with Dustin 100%. It is sort of designed to be used, you know, by the sites. But I think that it is powerful enough that a sponsor or CRO could use it also. You know, and it's simply a matter of how different things in the system are set up, which it is fully customizable based upon need. And I think that makes this particular platform an exceptionally powerful platform to use.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing your candid experience and feedback that I'm sure that our audience appreciates as we do. Now I'm going to turn over to Rick briefly for some closing remarks.
Definitely. Well, thanks everyone for joining the the conversation. Definitely want to hear, you know, if anyone in the audience has any questions, and we would be more than happy to answer those. I know that you know, really a lot of the feedback is around looking at, you know, opportunities for efficiencies and, you know, time savings. And it's always hard to try to think about the value of a new solution. if you don't know, how much time you may be spending in the current solution, or it's hard to understand what you're doing now today on paper in your shared drive in a hybrid system. One of the things that we've done with Complion, we partnered with CenterWatch to run a survey study about 160 different sites. Really the first survey of the amount of time and effort and burden that sites are doing within about 30 different tasks, all related to regulatory compliance. We're now in process of opening up this survey for really anyone who would be interested to complete this. And what that will allow you to do is actually run through the same survey that those 160 other sites have done, and then actually compare your site and how much time you're spending as a site to the average type of site from CenterWatch in your similar category. Are you a dedicated research site, multi-specialty site, hospital, health system, medical center, cancer center? So what we can do is we're now opening this up. We're going to be creating an online workload assessment tool. But for right now, you can, before that officially goes live, we're offering the opportunity for anyone that may be of interest to contact Lisa, or to show interest in the survey that will follow this webinar. And Lisa will be in touch with you, and we'll send you a web link where you can complete that same survey study and then get a customized analysis of the amount of time that you're spending in all of these different tasks at your site. What are other similar sites doing, and what would be the opportunities for improvement with an electronic system. So that's something that we definitely want to make available, and if anyone's interested, definitely contact Lisa or check that button on the form that you'd be interested to hear more from us, and we'll be in touch to set that up.
So just wrapping up, just to know that Complion offers free monthly educational webinars to the research community. So feel free to follow that link to register for any upcoming educational webinars of interest. We're also going to be attending some of these upcoming conferences, so if you want to come by and talk to us, we'd love to talk with you and introduce each other. Also, the CenterWatch article that Rick was referring to can be found by this particular link or accessing through the Complion website, as well as the survey. Like Rick said, please feel free to contact me and I can help facilitate that for you. And now I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Yes, thank you for that wonderful presentation. Now we're going to move into the question and answer portion of the presentation. I'm going to just request, we'll just go here for another 10 to 15 minutes to address some of the questions that have come in. What I'll do is I'll just read each question, and then the team of Complion can just address those as we go along. So the first thing that has come up is we have had a request to obtain the first webinar, Site Without Binders, that Complion did. And if you go to the resources section of the Bio-Optronics webpage, you'll see that you can download webinars there. You can request them and they'll just be emailed to you. So I'm going to move to the first question. How is correspondence managed electronically? Also, do you scan in documents and then destroy originals?
So could you please repeat that question?
Oh, sure. So it says, how is correspondence managed electronically? Also, do you scan in documents and then destroy originals?
So I'll provide a really quick overview. So a big concept to think about is that in an electronic world where you may be receiving the correspondence or documents electronically via email, or maybe sponsors are sending you this information via portals, the original copy that you're receiving is that electronic copy. And so with our system, what you can do is essentially directly upload from Outlook, as well as drag and drop from your desktop or from other portals into the system. And that act is essentially taking that original document, that electronic document, and that becomes your only, that becomes the version of the truth, the source of the truth that you're keeping in your electronic regulatory binder. And so there's really no reason to ever print out this information to begin with. Letting your sponsor know in advance that, or the CRO as well, that you're using an electronic system and where applicable, not to send paper files, but to provide you with the electronic versions, which actually helps make their life easier as well, is definitely the best practice. So ideally, you never have to print anything to begin with. You get the information electronically, you upload it, and that is your sole, original or source copy for those documents. So that's definitely the best practice that we see. And with the correspondence tool, we can have Outlook integration to pull documents into the system, as well as the other presenters mentioned a correspondence tool where you can route documents to be reviewed and or signed by other individuals within the system, and it captures that whole audit trail of the correspondence directly within the system.
Great. So the next question is, what about sponsors or CROs who require original signature documents to be maintained on site? Will a binder still somewhat be necessary to maintain documents as such?
So within our system, there are tools and ways to basically go through processes like delegation of authority in such a way that it can be electronic, and you can utilize e-signatures for that process moving forward.
Okay. Next question would be, is the eRegulatory software feasible for hospitals with local IRBs that are still adhering to paper submission, or is the service more for central IRB employing sites?
Yeah, good question. So I would say that is definitely still of value for sites that have a local IRB. Ideally, if you can, obtain the, the stamped, copies or approved copies from the IRB electronically, that would be the ideal case. If it is, the physical copy that you're receiving from the IRB, the approved copy is on paper, then obviously you would need to scan and upload that into the system, and we can support that as well. Moving that information into the system, and as long as you can have what's known as a certified copy, which has nothing to do with the electronic system, but more so a process to actually check that everything that was scanned in the file itself, the PDF that was created when you scan the document, has actually all of the pages and is legible. That electronic copy can become a certified copy, which is essentially the original, in some senses, that you will end up keeping, within your records, and that can be the auditable copy, that electronic file in the system. There's also, as I think Neil had mentioned, the ability to compile information can be very helpful. And so if we do have clients that if they have a paper IRB, instead of having to pull multiple documents together and physically print those out for the IRB, you can actually set up your regulatory binder in such a way that maybe you have a draft section and you're uploading multiple documents for your submission, and then you can actually hit one single compile button and it will compile out all of those documents for that submission to the IRB. And actually set up bookmarks, hyperlinks, cover sheets, page numbers, and kind of format that for you. So that ability to compile, whether it's for a paper IRB or for any other purposes where you might just want to provide your startup packet that's been completed back to the sponsor or CRO, that ability to compile documents on the fly can definitely be helpful.
Okay, great. So I'm going to kind of combine these next two questions because I believe that the first one was asked before you guys talked about electronic signatures. So somebody asked if Complion has electronic signature capability, and I know I'd heard you talk about that. So if there's anything that you want to add to that, why don't you add that to this question also? But I'm definitely positive that you guys said you have that. Some sponsors provide their own regulatory binders to the site to utilize. What is the workaround for that?
Dustin or Neil, would you be interested in answering? Maybe we lost them. So the question was about if the sponsor would provide a binder for the site.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah. If they provide their own regulatory binder, how would the sites get around that?
Gotcha. Okay, so one thing I was going to mention is, and I think actually Rick touched on it earlier, as he said that, you know, the sponsors can provide, in nearly every case, an electronic copy of the binder and regulatory documents, and those can be uploaded directly into the system. In our experience, I would say, again, you know, a lot of this comes down to, in some cases, educating the sponsor and CRO as you know, as well as educating your own staff, and that's where the validations in these systems come into place. But in a lot of cases, when they go to send you that binder, when you're doing your original submissions and originally working through your regulatory, you can ask them to send you electronic copies and to send you an electronic regulatory binder. And often they will send you either electronic copies, or even when they send you that binder, there'll often be, or sometimes you can get at the IMs, there'll be a thumb drive that actually contains all of the regulatory and startup paperwork on it, and you can just load that directly into your system. In the event that, again, they send you that binder, and I would say that in pretty much every study you ever work in, they send you a binder and say, here's the binder, here you go. And if you scan those in and then keep them in your system there, it makes that binder redundant. And I suppose that if you feel that a sponsor may really give you some pushback or may really be upset about it, I suppose if you wanted to complete those documents and keep them in the system and then demonstrate to them that it's a redundancy, then you could toss it at that point. We're more confident, I think, in usually just doing it from the outset and saying, well, this is how we do things, and really have not gotten any pushback. I would say the only pushback that we have ever gotten from a sponsor about not using their system was actually not from the sponsor, it was from a monitor himself. It was when we first started using the system, and we told him that all the regulatory documents were available online. The way it works when a monitor comes to review your regulatory documents is you give them an access code, and then they have a portal that they go to and they can view all the documents and not make changes. That's sort of a view-only user account. And we said, here you go, here's your access code, here's your portal email, and he just said, I trust you, it's fine. And so he just didn't even review our regulatory documents. I would say that's the most pushback we've ever gotten from a sponsor or CRO in not utilizing their system as they would like to have it. But as Rick said, it's really a redundancy, and there's no point to have a binder in any case.
So I've found that most of the sponsors are moving to an electronic trial master file anyway. While we do actually have some physical binders here, there's nothing in it except maybe some blank forms that sponsor had sent us to use. But otherwise I agree, you know, with what's been said before. Regarding audits, the compile feature of Complion's system, you know, allows you to have some options. A recent audit that we had, rather than allow the auditor direct access into the system, which takes training and user information, user IDs and stuff like that, I was able to compile the entire binder and just give it to the auditor on a flash drive, and they were able to just, as if they had access to their own system. It was really quite nice.
I would also say, too, to add to both of those comments, you know, the regulations in GCP are fairly clear that the site at the end of the day really needs to own and maintain these records. You know, they have a separate responsibility compared to that of the sponsor. And with sponsor-provided systems, typically the site doesn't actually own those records. The sponsor could lock you out of those. They could remove your users. And further, you haven't gone through that validation process to actually show that, yes, it is compliant. And further, if those things are in place, you know, then you're going to end up working with tons of sponsors that have tons of different systems. And I think the value in most cases, and as we've heard today, is really having one solution that you can use to manage, you know, all of your different documents and trials on. So I think that's another really good perspective to think about as well.
And Rick, you stole my thunder. Go. We're ready for the next question, Lisa.
Okay, great. So the next question is, does this software have the ability to communicate, or I would assume integrate with other software available, such as clinical trial management software or eIRB software and things like that?
Yes, definitely. I think you know, having a streamlined flow of information is definitely the way to really produce, you know, long-term efficiencies. And having you know, a software system that's built with that in the forefront to help you think through those things, you know, is definitely you know, valuable. Obviously, every software system is built differently, and there's a lot of them out there, but we can, you know, talk through in more detail if anyone would be interested, you know, after the webinar to learn more.
Okay, and then how many customers are using Complion now?
Yeah, good question. So, you know, this is a newer type of technology, but one that is very quickly growing. And so we're seeing, you know, now pretty wide adoption across lots of different sites, from smaller private practice groups and multi-specialty sites, dedicated research sites, up to larger hospitals, health systems, and medical centers. So there's definitely, it's something that is, you know, very quickly getting adopted within the industry, and would love to, if anyone's interested, to learn more. You know, obviously we only have the ability to kind of share the names of certain groups that we're working with that have, you know, provided us with that that right to do so, but would love to, you know, share that with any groups that might be interested to learn more, and, you know, contact us after the webinar.
Okay, great. So I just have one last question here that we'll ask. And it's basically, we have a trial now using EDX, which is sponsor mandated. I don't see how the sponsor would allow one site to use the system over the EDX. And there's a couple of questions similar to this. I know you guys have addressed the sponsors taking, you know, the e-submissions of these documents, but there's a couple different people on here who have said, you know, they're concerned that, you know, they have a wet ink document that they have to give to the sponsors, and they're not sure if maybe it's just the learning curve on the sponsor side or how you can handle that. And I know you've talked about it a little bit, but if you want to just elaborate a little bit more, that'll be our final question, and then we can go from there.
Dustin and Neil, we'd be interested to hear what you might have to say about those aspects.
So some of our sponsors have actually asked for wet signatures in certain cases. The bottom line is that if there really is a true understanding of 21 CFR 11, they'll understand that an electronic signature is the equivalent. It's the exact same thing as a wet signature. And there is, as the attendees have noted, there is a learning curve. There is a comfortability curve, just as there was a comfortability curve for us in making the switch from a paper regulatory system to an electronic regulatory system. As far as I know, from a regulatory perspective, there is nothing out there that absolutely positively has to have a wet signature as long as the electronic signatures are 21 CFR 11 compliant. That's sort of the position that we took. And as I noted, with the exception of that one sponsor who eventually came around, we have not had any pushback at all. There's documentation that Complion can provide that will certify the the compliance with the CFRs, and that was really enough for the sponsors to say, okay, that's fine.
Okay, wonderful for that. So that wraps up our Q&A for today. Just a reminder that the slides will be sent out via email within 24 hours after today's presentation. Thank you, everyone, for attending the presentation today. We hope you found today's presentation interesting and informative. And a big thanks again to Rick and his team for presenting. Be sure to be on the lookout for the next installment of the Clinical Conductor webinar series. Have a great afternoon. Bye.